Drill up, drill down, drill across, drill through. Spotfire automatically creates these brush linking features for you where you can drill to specific parts of your data. Let's look at some examples. Here I'm looking at video game sales in Europe and North America, and each of these bars represents a different platform. To do a drill down, all I need to do is simply right click and go to Create Details Visualization and choose the type of chart I want. So I'll just choose a pie chart here, and this is empty by default, but when I select some data, you'll see that Spotfire has created this drill down where I'm seeing 41.9% of the sales from what I've selected is in the EU, and then the other 58.1% is in North America. And as I selected different data, you'll see this all change. I'm able to drill into the data from the first chart into the second chart. So how is this all working? This is all happening through markings, and it's important to go through the fundamentals of how markings work because they're core to setting up the interactivity in Spotfire. So to start, I'm going to go over to this next page, and here I have all of my video game sales in this table. You can see each individual row here, and I have a bar chart on the right, which is an aggregate of all of the different games by genre, and at the bottom I have the critic score and the user score. Now a marking always selects rows of data. So if I select an aggregate, like let's say the action games, it's going to mark all of the rows that correspond to action games. So I'm seeing that here in the genre column. Now here on the bottom right, it selected all of those rows. I can see each of these individual points. So if I selected, let's say, just an individual row, that's going to mark it over here on that individual point on my scatter plot, and that corresponds to this bar in my bar chart. So that's how, plain and simple, the very basics of how a marking works. Now you manage markings by going to File and Document Properties, and you have the Markings tab, and you can set up new markings in here. You can also change the name and the color of these markings. So why would I want to set up new markings? Well, even if I'm using the same data, I can actually have separate markings. So here on the top, I can select my fighting or my action games, and you'll see that marking across on the top, but it's not doing anything on the bottom. On the bottom here, I've selected the marking B, my second option, which is the yellow marking. And when I select this, you'll see that this is operating entirely independent of the first marking, even though it's working on the same data. So now I can drill across in different ways as I need to. Now let's go into some more detailed configurations of markings. So here I can select my markings and I can see them on the right. I get this nice light blue color. If I go into my visualization properties, you'll see under the appearance, there's this checkbox for using separate color for marked items. And by default, this is usually unchecked, which means that whatever color your data was is what's going to be showing up, and then the unmarked data is going to be faded out. So now as I select different values, the unmarked data is faded out, but the marked data is shown in the selected color. Now the other thing I can do is I can go into this data submenu, and there's a lot of important options in this data submenu. So here I can choose if I want to limit the data by a marking. Now this is only going to show the values from what I have selected, and it's not going to fade out or show the unselected values. If I want, I can have this where it's all data, so if nothing's selected, it'll show everything. But I can also choose this to be an empty visualization, so nothing's shown until I select something. And that's usually the default when you right-click and create a details visualization. It'll be set to an empty visualization, so you'll have to choose to change it to something else if you'd like. The third option is a message on an empty background. You can put whatever message you'd like in here. And when you don't have something selected, it'll show that message there until you select something, and you can change the format of that in the fonts submenu. Now here, going back, let's uncheck this. So now we're showing all the data. So I can select multiple points on a visualization by just dragging across, and that will be a rectangular selection. But I can also use the Alt key on my keyboard, and with Alt I can grab lasso selection of values. So if I want to find something very specific, I can select those. I can also hold the Control key down and select individual points as I'd like. Now let's look at the search. So you can use the search with the magnifying glass or just hit Control F on your keyboard, and I can type in something like sports. Now I can mark sports, and for that genre, all the sports games are marked here. If I want to add something like action games, I can hit that and add action games. So that's a very useful way to find specific values, even if those values aren't shown in your charts, such as marking, for instance, the Nintendo games. I can hit Nintendo here, and for publisher Nintendo, these are all the Nintendo games. Now, if you want to specifically drill into some of the data, like let's say where the user score and the critic scores are the highest, you can right click, and on marked rows, you can filter directly to that and jump into just that data, and it'll filter all of the other charts just to match that selection. You can also select something and right click and invert it to select the opposite. Now, starting in Spotfire 10.5, you can actually select some data and you can get AI insights on whatever you have marked. So by clicking this light bulb icon, I can see a relationship with the other variables in my data set, and I can see there's a strong relationship with the release date. So bringing this down, I can see that the marked data, which is shown in blue, was all released during this time period and had the highest ratings. There were a lot of games released throughout the other time periods, but they didn't meet this same relationship of having the high critic scores and high user scores. Now to close out, here are some of my personal recommendations with markings. 1, try to build your drill downs and interactivity so that it flows from top to bottom or left to right, similar to the flow of reading a page in a book. 2, don't use too many markings and drill downs on the same page, because that can confuse a user on what they need to select in order to get to the data that they're trying to view. And my final recommendation is not to do drill downs across pages, because if someone wants to undo that drill down, they need to unmark the master visualization, which could be on a separate page, and that can be very confusing for them to keep track of.